to our webinar. Welcome to the first webinar the Justice Pillar is hosting for the Commission of African American Affairs. Before we get started, we'll have a welcome from the Executive Director of the Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service, the host of our webinar this evening. Alberto?
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you to the panelists and presenters and commission members for helping us put on tonight's event. I have to confess that when Tiffany presented this topic to me, I was frankly confused. It was an educational moment for me, and not a good one. I have to say, as someone that's from Arizona, graduated from an Arizona high school, from Arizona State University, master's degree from NAU. I worked in the governor's office and the Secretary of State's office way back in the day. Not to toot my own horn, but to say, with all of that experience working extensively in the Hispanic and Black and Native American communities, doing LGBTQ advocacy, I didn't know. I was unaware. As a former property owner, I've owned homes in Mesa and Tempe. I didn't know anything about this topic, and it was confusing to me. I was like, what are you talking about? Restrictive requirements with regards to sale of property based on race? Like that can't possibly, how is that a thing? So Tiffany had to educate me on that. And it was shocking and disturbing to me that even though they're not legally enforceable, these things still exist. And I thought, absolutely, this is really important for us to shed a light on. If you're not familiar with the story of Ed Pastor, he was frankly an amazing person. He came from a humble community, Globe Miami area. He wasn't someone that came from money and powerful connections. He came from a little mining town and quickly became one of the most powerful members of Congress. But so much of what he did during his time in Congress was to really bring voices to the table of communities that had been left out. And it was really important for him to encourage young people and others from underrepresented communities to have a place in advocacy and to see how they could begin to be more effective advocates for change. But a lot of how you do that is setting the context. Why are things the way they are now? How is our current political and social situation based in things that happened in the past? And tonight's topic, I think, really gets to the heart of that. Why are our communities challenged the way they are? So much of it comes down to these historical issues that we're not taught about in schools. As I mentioned, I never heard any of this, and I'm past 50 at this point in my life to be just now learning about these issues. So I'm really excited for tonight's event and for all of us to learn what we can do to begin to shed a light on that history and empower people to take action to make Arizona a better place for everyone. So thank you all for participating, and I'm excited to learn from our panelists.
And good evening, everybody. My name is Robbie Sherwood. I am proud and honored to be a member, commissioner on the Commission of African American Affairs. Dianne and I are new to the commission, appointed earlier this year. And one of the things that we and the other newly appointed commissioners have in common is a desire to make this commission as helpful and useful and relevant to the communities we serve as we possibly can. And one of the ideas we came up with was these webinars to bring issues of importance to the community, things you need to know about, to the forefront and share that information so that you, the people who are on this webinar with us, can take that information out and share it as well. So thank you so much for being here, Juan. And I would tell you, we do intend to try to come up with other topics and have these, and I'll tell you about our next one at the end of this process. But I don't want to take any more time away from our subject matter expert, Dianne Post. I think you will really enjoy what she has to say. I will just say though, in my day job, I am I work at the Arizona State Legislature in communications for the Democratic caucus in the House. And the legislature gets rightfully gets a pretty bad rap for being pretty politically divided, and it's often very difficult to get things done, the right things. But every once in a while, they do get it right. And the reason why we're talking about this bill, this law today, is because it just took effect. The legislature said when the legislative session ends 90 days after they adjourn sine die. That is what's called the general effective date, and that happened to be just about a week ago. I think Dianne probably knows the date better than I, but I'll kick it off. And so this law is now in effect, and I want to hear what Dianne has to say, so I will stop talking. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherwood, for your welcomes. Real quick, I just want to say welcome as well. My name's Tiffany. I am the chair of the Justice Pillar here for the Commission of African American Affairs. And I just want to say we are so grateful that everyone is spending your evening with us, and those of you who are watching the replay who are getting this really good information. As Commissioner Sherwood said, please stay tuned for more contributions like this that will be coming from us and other pillars of the commission. But like Mr. Robbie said, let's go ahead. Excuse me, Commissioner Sherwood said, let's go ahead and bring Commissioner Dianne Post up so that we can get started with today's conversation. Now, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A function of the webinar to place your questions in there. We will have time for question and answers as we get after Commissioner Post is finished with her presentation. So without further ado, Commissioner Post, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for hosting this and for introducing me. In addition to being on the commission, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer since before God was born. So I did a lot of family law, and then I did human rights law for about the last 20 years. And for a very long time, I was the main counsel for the state NAACP. This whole issue began in Arizona with a new person who moved to Tucson to get a job at the U of A, and he moved there and he bought a house. Well, he bought the house and he was reading his deed, and he found the section on his deed that said his house could not be sold to a Black person. So his spouse was Black. So he was very offended. So he called up the real estate agent and he said, "What the blue blazes is this?" And the real estate agent said, "Well, it's old. It can't be enforced. It's not important anymore. You know, don't worry about it." He said, "Well, I am going to worry about it because it shouldn't be here. And it says something negative about society and about property and that sort of thing." So he then called the Tucson NAACP and said to them, would the NAACP take this on as changing the law in Arizona? So she called me because I was a registered lobbyist, and yeah, here we are. So one person started this, and this is what can happen when you are one person and you take action and really move forward, because he did it. So now it's done. So after the lawyer in Tucson from the NAACP had called me and asked about this, I dug out my lease. I bought the house in '89, and my lease is 15 pages long, front and back, single spaced, tiny little print. And even though I'm a lawyer, I will admit I did not read every single word, although I tell you, when you do something, read every word, but I didn't do it myself. So I went through there and I read it, and sure enough, there on page 13 in the bottom, it said, my house can only be sold to a Caucasian. Now, some of these things, that's the only time I've seen that. Most of them say it can't be sold to Negroes, Jews. Sometimes it says Asians, sometimes it says Chinese or Japanese, sometimes it says Mexicans. Was a common one to actually put Mexicans in there. So a variety of possibilities of what it may actually say. So this particular law that passed is called the Uniform Unlawful Restrictions of Land Records Act. Now, when I say uniform, that should give you a clue that this is a uniform law. There is such a thing as a uniform law commission of lawyers, judges, professors, etc., who try to get laws passed around the country that are exactly that, uniform. So they're trying to get this law passed all around the country. 7 states have different varieties of this law. We are the second state to actually pass the really exact same law. So we're the second one that did that. And as Robbie said, it just went into effect on September 16th. So we started out with a stakeholder group, and the stakeholders were the county recorders, the Land Title Association people and their lobbyists, the uniform law commissioners. We had a local one and one from New York, real property lawyers, homeowners, and representatives from the affected groups, and legal experts, like ones who had written books about it and that sort of thing. Now, this is not a new issue, and I know Alberto didn't know about it, but as lawyers, we do know about it. And in 1948, there was a case, I don't remember what city or state it was in, but there was a case in which the Supreme Court said, we can't make such clauses or provisions in your deed illegal, but we are going to say that courts will not enforce them. So meaning just what it says. So you could have it, but you couldn't get it enforced. But the people didn't know that. Only a few lawyers and a few judges knew that. So it didn't change the behavior of the people because they really didn't even know that such a thing existed. So the practice continued until 1968, when the Fair Housing Act passed with the other bills that passed in the civil rights period. And then included the under LBJ. So that passed in 1968. What happened prior to that, and why you need to worry about whether it's on your home, is many of the homes built prior to 1968 have this on their deed, especially in subdivisions. Many of the subdivisions built by big companies had this in there. Levittown is a famous one that was one of the first subdivisions that had it. And it's in many HOAs, it's in many of the planned communities, it's in there in the CNRs or in the deeds. So if you live in a home that's older than 1968, it is likely to be there. Now, when homeowners see this today, it angers them and it embarrasses the real estate people. One of the other people in our stakeholder group was Jewish. She lived in North Phoenix and she bought a house, moved here, bought a house, looked at it and said, Jews couldn't buy this house. And there she was, she'd already bought it. So when the commission tried to put together this model law or this uniform law, they looked at all the ones that existed. At that time, 7 had existed already with 2 cities doing it, and looked at, how it worked well, how it didn't work so well, how it cost too much, how it didn't cost too much, how, some of them you had to go to court and that was too impossible because people are not going to hire a lawyer to go to court and clogged up the courts, etc. So there were some pros and cons. So they tried to find a simple, low-cost way for homeowners in these common interest communities, that's what they call them, the HOAs, et cetera, to amend their title documents to remove the restriction. Now, it does not put any new penalties or problems or work on the land recording offices because they actually make money. Because you, the homeowner, is responsible for making the decision, do you want to do this or not? And if you do, it will cost you $30. And $30 is not outlandish for most people who can, manage to do that. Secondly, it's only a minimum expense on you, as I mentioned, the $30. Third, it refers to the anti-discrimination laws already in place in Arizona. So I didn't have to argue with the legislature about creating new lists of people who can't be discriminated against because we already have those lists. It's in Title 44 of our statute about unemployment or about employment discrimination and those kinds of things. So it's just refers back to the already existing law in Arizona saying who cannot be discriminated against. And that includes people with disabilities. And this is an important point because this was the only criticism that came about to the bill, was preserving the original historical records. Historians did not want the original deed to actually wipe out that provision because historians wanted the real document, the actual document, to prove we did this. We all know that there's a lot of erasure of our history going on. And as Alberto said, we're not taught this history. So if you erased it from the records, then, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, they say, well, we never did this. Well, yes, you did do it. And we wanted to leave it in the records so that that historical data is there and shows that this really happened because it's part of redlining. It's part of the problem of generational wealth. It's part of a lot of the problems that continue from that time on into today. And they carry on and they have an impact today from these provisions that existed back then. So this is an individual focused action that you, the homeowner, decides to take. No action from government is necessary. When you record it, it's $30 and that's all there is to it. And it's up to you on your own. It's simple and it's inexpensive. Now, Tiffany has put the form in the chat. So you can download the form, or you can go to the statute 33-536, ARS, Arizona Revised Statutes 33-536, and download it, whatever you want to do. So it's a simple one-page form that you need to fill out. And the form, the first page is just who's the name of the owner, who owns this property. You put the address and you put the legal description. Now, having to put the legal description may require you find your deed, or if you don't know where it is or what happened to it, you can look your own property up on the assessor's website and find the legal description there. You can find your deed there. So you might have to look something up on the internet to find it if you can't find the document in your own files or in your own house. That's number 3. It says to amend, and then it lists the title of the document being amended. So whatever is the title of that document, the recording date when it is being, the recording date of the document. So when it was first recorded. So mine was first recorded in 1920. So that's the original recording date of it. And then it asks the recording information. And that's that thing you've seen on property that gives book and the page, and or an instrument number. That thing is, you know, book 2, page 37, or whatever it is. That's your book and page. Again, that's not usually things you have laying around your house or in your wallet. So you might have to look that up at the assessor's office to find what that is in order to put that information in there. Then it just says on this one-page form, this is what we're doing. We're saying that this is an unlawful restriction, and it's going to be, you know, not there anymore. So it's not effective. It has to be signed and dated by you and notarized. So it is something that has to be notarized. So you probably have to go somewhere, your bank, a real estate agent, or some other place where you can get a notary, and you file it with your own county recorder, whatever county you live in. It doesn't matter. It's $30 in Maricopa. I know it's $30 in Pinal County. I don't know what it is in other counties, but approximately $30 is what it's going to cost you. Some counties will allow you to do online registration. I think actually Maricopa County you can. But some of the more rural counties particularly do not allow you to do online registration. You have to physically go there. I know Pinal County, I have to go tomorrow actually, physically go there and file the deed at their particular offices. So you'd have to check with whatever county you're living in. So that is the long and short of it. I mean, it's not difficult. It's as I said, a simple and inexpensive law to address this problem that has been with us from the beginning. And if you are in a church or an organization or a sorority or whatever you might be in, if you want me to come and speak to your group, you want to get a bunch of people together and have me come and speak to them, I am happy to do that. So you can, I guess you could contact the Arizona Commission, right, Tiffany? And just let me know if you're interested in that. So that is really the end of it. That's the bill. So Tiffany, what are the questions?
If we don't have any yet, I have a question or just a comment. You mentioned the issue of redlining. I think one of the most important things about this is it sounds like something that is antiquated and ancient history, but you said it was still being enforced until 1968. And Phoenix, if you're familiar with the history of the city of Phoenix, there was redlining until the early 1960s. If you were a person of color, you could not live north of Van Buren Street. And there's some very interesting. I encourage you to research, Google that history. It involves Lincoln and Eleanor Ragsdale family. If you know them, the Ragsdale Executive Terminal at Sky Harbor is named after them. Very first African American millionaire in Phoenix. They helped finance the lawsuits that desegregated our schools a year before the rest of the country, and they attempted to buy a house in Encanto, were turned down, and then turned around and bought that same house with a white proxy straw buyer. Everybody flipped out, but they didn't move. They stayed there, and they busted that color line, and then did it again later in Paradise Valley. But you know, what the larger point here is that this is not ancient history. There are plenty of people in our communities who who were around when this was the law, and it's it's pretty recent.
When I moved here in 1980, I got involved in a fight about where to put Interstate 10 because there's a lot of history with the government putting freeways and roads straight through Black communities in order to break them up, or putting them to separate Black and white communities. And that's exactly why Interstate 10 is where it is. It had originally started to be down further south at Roosevelt, but then the powers that be wanted to make sure that the, I forgot the name of the, Garfield neighborhood was not included in the McDowell. I live just south of McDowell, was not included in the McDowell neighborhood. So they put that freeway right straight through and make sure that Garfield was south of the freeway so that they would not be in the same district, kind of things like that. So there's a fabulous book. I don't know, Robert, do you remember the name of the book or the author? By a couple of lawyers, a dad and daughter, both housing lawyers, and it talks about the use of not only redlining, but the freeways, taxing, all kinds of things, and how this has been used to reinforce segregation and how it still echoes down today in the harm that is being done to the African-American community.
I'm not familiar with that book, but I would love to read it. But there are some great histories by Dr. Matthew Whitaker, formerly of ASU, who did some great research on this. And you're right, you do see this as an issue, not to take us far afield, but industrial racism and the location of harmful industries around communities of color and separating on there. But yeah, thank you for this. And if there's any other questions on there, we'll have Tiffany raise them up. There is
I did have a comment just to add. So the book I believe you're talking about might be The Color of Law, written by, Richard Rothstein.
Yes.
And but that
daughter wrote one after that.
Yep. It's a very phenomenal book to really expose segregation, the beginning of segregation, de facto segregation, which is much of what we are living in now, and kind of the remnants of how this all started. So it's a really, really good book to read. There's also lectures out there on YouTube that he's given that kind of just breaks down the book itself. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, that second book that was written by him and his daughter. I mean, I know a heck of a lot about this, and I actually learned something because I did not realize how the assessor's office that assesses your property was manipulating things to basically take advantage of African Americans. I mean, you think the assessor is just the assessor, right? That is not true. And I have a niece and a sister that live in Milwaukee. And so they were talking about areas in Milwaukee. So I know what they're talking about because I've been there. So they talked about how here's this house in this Black area. It is assessed at a higher value than a better house in this area. So the Blacks are paying more taxes. However, they're in an area with a lower overall base tax rate. So their schools have less income. I mean, hitting you, coming and going. I mean, it was just unbelievable to me. I did not realize that was going on, but I'm sure it's not only Milwaukee where it's going on.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions in the chat. So, but I did want to just touch back on one thing you said, Commissioner Post. You said that anything north of Van Buren was redlined, right?
I said that. Yeah, that was my understanding. Yes.
Okay. So that might be safe to say that if your home is north of Van Buren, you have a deed restriction on your deed. So one of those questions were, can homeowners check online to see if their home has a restrictive covenant? And is there a particular section of the document that the restrictive covenant is usually placed in?
Yes, you can check online if your county has the documents online. Not every county does. Maricopa does. So yes, you can check online. You go in, you put your address in, you call up that parcel number in that place, and then it'll list the documents, and then you click on the document you want, and there it is. So yes, you can get it online in the counties that have it online, not all of them. And what was the second part of that question now? I forgot.
Is there a particular place in the document?
There is not a particular place in your deed. There is no particular place to look to find it. Like I told you, mine was on page 13 of 15 on the very bottom of that double long page when they used the legal paper. So it was longer than, regular 8.5 by 11. So no, I've looked at many and they're in all different places. So you're going to have to read it word by word.
Okay. All right. Those were the two questions that we had in the chat so far. Were there any other questions from anyone in the audience?
Comments or anything like that?
Going once?
Oh,
Twice?
Alberta said, you're not the only one that didn't know. No, many, many people didn't know. Even when I was down at the legislature testifying about why do we need this, people were going, I didn't know that ever happened. Oh yeah, it did.
Yeah, I would just layer onto that. Like once you start researching history like this, you find out all kinds of things you didn't know. My wife is a PhD, getting her PhD, and is doing some really in-depth research into the history of Arizona State University. And I don't think a lot of people know that Tempe, probably one of your more progressive, forward-looking college towns, was a sundown town. If you don't know what a sundown town is, then Google that. But it's a town where if you were a person of color, you could not be out and about after sundown, or you would be in either legal or physical danger. And Tempe, it's a very complicated history because ASU was educating Black students before a lot of other institutions would do that. But those students couldn't be out and about after sundown, and then they've had to go back and this same sort of scrubbing that people were doing with their deeds. Tempe's having to do it with their elementary schools because a few of them were named after Klansmen. And so that's happening right now, and I'm really thankful for the leadership of Mayor Corey Woods in that regard right now. But you learn a lot when you start looking.
So Alberta, in answer to your question, yes, the Arizona Association of Realtors was actually a stakeholder in the group that got this changed. And they said they've actually been wanting to change this for quite a long time, as have the real estate attorneys and the real estate salespeople. So yes, they've been involved. A couple of things have happened. The lawyer in that group, he and I wrote a joint article which went out to all of the associations, all of the HOAs, all of the condo associations, all of everybody who is a member of that group, and also a real estate lawyer who used to be the president of the state bar real property section. She sent out information about it to all of the lawyers. And then the third group, there was another group, I don't think it was, I can't remember now exactly who the name of the third group, but they also have an executive director, and we've been in touch with her, and she has sent that information out. So yes, the information has been getting out to the people in the industry.
Yeah, and just for the sake of the recording, I'll restate the question. The question was, has the Arizona Association of Realtors done anything to educate real estate professionals about this and how to advise home buyers about how to rectify these restrictions? So thank you for that. There is another question. We have a couple more questions, so I'll go ahead and read the next question. It says, an association of property owners, or an HOA, can act to amend its own governing instrument to remove the racial restrictions, right?
Yes, let me explain that. It's a good question. Because normally an HOA, if they're going to change their CC&Rs or change something, has to have a vote of the entire body of the HOA. They do not in this situation. One person, one member of the HOA can bring this to the board, and because it's already illegal, the board can pass it without going out and having to have a vote by all the members.
Okay.
So yes, one person, if you're in an HOA, take it to your HOA board, and they do not need to have, notice and a community-wide vote.
And then the second part of that question is, but if there is a voluntary neighborhood association that has nothing to do with the original subdivision documents and CCRs, all it can really do is encourage neighbors to fill out the form and record it. Is that correct?
That is correct. If it is not a legal entity that controls or has any input, it's just a voluntary association. Yes, they can educate their people, and some of them have been doing that. The neighborhood associations, the one I live in, Green Gables, others that I know about, have been educating their community associations at their meetings about this new law so that people can start taking advantage of it.
Okay, wonderful. And then we have another question that states, was it difficult to find sponsors for this legislation and was it bipartisan?
It was not difficult to find sponsors. It was bipartisan. It was Mitzi Epstein in the Senate and Jay Mesnar, a Republican, and Mitzi Epstein's a Democrat. They were the joint co-sponsors. We just got the two of them, and they were the ones that sponsored it in the Senate. And no, it was not hard, and nobody disagreed. It went through to committee, through the Senate, through the House, 32 to 0, 31 to 0 and 16 to 0. It sailed right through. So you kind of think, why did somebody do this earlier? But that's just it. This one person took the effort to contact somebody and take action, and look what happened. So it is true that each one of us is very important, and everything we do to help bring justice and equality to this world is important.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have another question that states, I was raised in a red line area here in Tucson on 4th Avenue and 6th Street near Tucson High from 1960 till 1975. How can I find out the exact time this went on?
Actually, quite easily. The professor who was the one that started this whole thing is Jason Jurovich, and he's at U of A. And his partner said, well, you're a researcher, research. So in fact, he got a grant. And he did, in fact, research Tucson. He only did Tucson. And he researched the map, and he mapped all of Tucson to find out where exactly these homes were. So it's online. And you can look up the map, and you can look up, well, he's got, like you put the map and then you put gray areas where these are the places where the restrictive covenants were found. And it's mostly the older neighborhoods downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the, well, they're now older, I guess, subdivisions that, are more towards the outside, but it's still actually mostly downtown. But yes, you can find it. It's Mapping Racist Covenants in Tucson, Arizona. If you just look that up, or if you can't find that, just go to Jason Jurovich, Jurevich, at ASU, at U of A, and he can give it to you.
All right, wonderful. These are great questions. Thank you to all of our attendees asking these wonderful questions. As a follow-up to the real estate or the realtors conversation, Alberto had a follow-up that said, I believe real estate agents have to complete a certain amount of continuing education credits every year to retain their license, correct? Perhaps this could be, I'm sorry.
I don't know that.
Okay. I do believe so. If you hold a license there, you do have to do continuing education credits. So he states perhaps this could be a required training that would count for CTE credit for realtors.
That's a heck of a good idea. Now, I never thought about that, but I'll get back with the Charles Sellers. He's the lawyer that heads that other organization that I've been dealing with. I'll get back to him and ask him if he and I could put that training on together. So I'll get a hold of him and see if we can do that. That's a great idea.
All right, and then we have another question that states, how did you get around the fact that these covenants are sometimes in perpetuity?
Well, they're not actually. And you get around it because it's illegal. You can't make something, if it becomes illegal, you can't keep it. So actually they're not in perpetuity. And it wasn't an issue. It wasn't a legal issue at all because it's illegal. Slavery is illegal now too, right? Except for-profit prisons.
Yeah. Another webinar, Miss Dianne. Another
webinar. There we go. Yes.
Yeah, I think that, to answer that question, they were in perpetuity before this new law passed. So now that this new law is here that can scrub the deed of that language, it's no longer there. So there's no perpetuity for that because it can now be scrubbed.
That didn't happen with this law. That happened back in 1948 and then 68 when it was actually implemented.
Okay.
This law just gives the homeowner the ability to take action and speak about your values and your beliefs and make sure that they are reflected in the property you own, in the place where you live, and in the actions that you take.
Period. All right, we have another question that says, or a statement that said, it might also be good to contact tile companies and see if they would routinely offer this document at the time of a closing.
They actually already do, and title companies and their lobbyists were in the stakeholder group. So yes, that is something that they do. At least that's what they told me. I mean, I can check back if you've had an experience where somebody didn't, but they assured me, or they said that that's what they wanted to do.
Perfect. All right, another question. Is this law in other states? I know earlier in the talk you said this were the second law state.
7 states, well, 9 now. 7 states have some variety of this, but not exactly this. 2 states, us and I think it's Ohio, maybe it's Pennsylvania, have this exact law. So there's 2 states that have this exact law, and then there's 7 others that have some variation of this and were passed earlier. And there's also 2 cities, which is ironically Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is just outside of Milwaukee, which I just find amazing. But anyway, a couple of cities that also have passed this kind of a law.
Perfect. All right, so we see Alberto has dropped that Mapping Racist Covenants website into
Great.
the chat for everybody if folks want to access that. It doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat. So we will keep our eye on it as long as we're here if other questions come through. But I will lend it back to you, Commissioner Post or Commissioner Sherwood.
Actually, I'm done. I think Robbie had something else he wanted to say.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank the participants who came here, and the questions were outstanding. This was a really good conversation and really inspiring for what we want to build out of this program of webinars. And so you always want that first one to go great, and I feel really good about this. But I do want to give you a pitch if you enjoyed this content. Roughly this same time. Next month, and maybe on a different night, but that 3rd week of October, we will put our second one, and this one is about a program, similar story, slightly different track to success of a program that was brought forward to legislators by a single concerned father, again from someone who was concerned about his son who is living on with the autism spectrum disorder, but who drives, and was worried about his interactions, potential interactions with police because of his style of communication. It might be misinterpreted, excuse me, in a traffic stop, how bad things happen, and we want to prevent that. And we came forward with a program that was actually implemented without new legislation internally at the Department of Transportation, called the Blue Envelope Program. We'll tell you all about it in a month, but it is available out there. It's an envelope that you can put your title and proof of insurance in. That's colored. So then, if a person gets pulled over, they hand that up. Instant visual cue to an officer that this is a person who is on the autism spectrum, and that may explain why perhaps they're not answering questions in the way that they were anticipating. But we'll have the people who brought that forward, the people who are working with it now to see how it's going. It's been out there for less than a year, and information on how, if you're interested, how you can take part in that. So I'd really love to see you back. Thanks.
Thank you
very much. And you're very quick.
Sorry, sorry for talking at the same time, but thank you, Commissioner Sherwood, for those remarks. I'm excited to learn more about this program as well. I think it's going to be very beneficial for the community to have awareness of this program. So in true Tiffany fashion, we are going to ask Alberto to come on screen, and I'm going to take a screenshot, because if I don't screenshot it, it never happened. Just kidding, we're recording this, but I like to say funny things sometimes. So, all right, everybody, 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right, thank you so much for that screenshot. Also, we will be sending out this recording to everyone who registered for tonight's webinar, whether you joined or didn't join. And stay tuned. Hopefully we'll get it out there on the social medias and out there on the airwaves as well. But if you do need a presentation like this, if you do need Commissioner Post or any one of us to come out and continue this conversation with you, please visit the Commission of African American Affairs website. It was dropped into the chat as well, but I'll say it. It's azcaa.az.gov. Go to the contact us portion of that website to submit a contact form and somebody will get back to you. But again, that website is azcaa.az.gov. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Good
We
night, thank
appreciate
you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Sherwood.
No, I just said I was saying good night and thank you again for the people who participated.
Yes, wonderful. Have a good night, everyone.